Okay, so now we are going to focus on storage. Now, Azure Storage is a very important service to understand. And before I explain anything about storage, I want you to understand one thing, that storage and database both are different things. When you have a database, it's like something which is allowing me to store a structured data, mostly in the tabular format. Storage is not like that. Storage allows you to store data no matter your data is in which format. That's the reason. Let's deep dive into storage for Azure. In this particular module, we are first going to compare Azure Storage services, because in Azure Cloud also there are many various options and flavors of Azure Storage available. We are going to describe storage tiers, we are going to describe redundancy options of the storage, and we are also going to understand storage account options and storage types. So don't get confused with this, so many terms which are associated with the storage. We'll explain this one by one. You have to identify the options for moving your files, including there are the options like AZ copy tool is there, Azure Storage Explorer is there, and there is something called Azure File Sync. So when you want to move your data and files from your on-premise servers or computers to cloud, which option is the right suitable option for you? We need to figure that out. And then the last one is we are going to describe the migration options, including there is a tool called Azure Migrate from Azure side, and there is another thing which is known as Azure Data Box. What are these terms? What are the services? That's what we are going to focus in this particular module. Let's start with the storage account. When you are creating a storage account, that storage account should have a globally unique name, mostly in the smaller case. You cannot use capital letters in this. It's going to have a globally unique name in the smaller case. When you provide this kind of a storage account, it allows you to store data, and then it will allow you to access the data over the internet. Most of the time, this is having some background API using which you can access the data directly, even using the REST API browsers which are integrated with that. You can determine the storage services and redundancy options while creating storage account. Now, we know that whenever we create storage account through Azure portal, there are plenty of options which are coming with that. I will go to these options very soon, but yeah, let's focus on that first. What kind of redundancy options are available? Well, basically we have four options in that: LRS, ZRS, GRS, and GZRS. These all are actually focusing on where exactly you want to store your data and how many replicated copies of your data you're looking for. If I go for LRS, which is locally redundant storage, it is going to keep 3 copies of my data within the single data center. Now these 3 copies are going to be useful for me if one of the copy is not accessible because of some issues like disk failure or a rack failure kind of a thing. When this kind of things happens, the other copies which are there in the same data center will be useful so that I can access the data. Now, at the right side of this, we have a durability which is mentioned here, which is very similar to high availability in terms of virtual machine. When it is saying 11 nines, it's going to be 99.999 kind of total 11 nines are going to be there. That is what a durability you are getting from LRS. Then we have ZRS, which is little better than LRS, which is like it's going to use 3 availability zones in the primary region. So you are still going to have 3 copies of your data, but those 3 copies you're going to store in 3 different zones of the same region. We already know that one region is going to have 3 zones, and that means we are using 3 separate data centers for them. Better than ZRS is GRS, which is geo redundant storage, and as the name suggests, this is going to use single data center in primary region, and in another region altogether they are going to use another copies. So it's like this is going to involve 2 different regions. Obviously these 2 regions are going to be paired regions. So if you choose primary as East US, you already know that secondary region for that is going to be the paired region of that, which is West US. Now once you understand these first 3 redundancy configurations like LRS, ZRS, and GRS, the fourth one is actually combination of ZRS and GRS. This GZRS name itself is telling you that this is going to use something like ZRS, which is zone redundant storage, plus it is going to use a secondary region, which is geo-redundant. So this is going to use 3 availability zones in the primary region and one single data center in the secondary region. Out of this 4, this is the best one because this is going to use total 4 different data centers. In the primary region, they are going to have 3 zones, so they are going to create 3 copies in that. And in the secondary region, they are going to use one data center in which they are going to keep another 3 copies. So total 6 copies will be there, 2 different regions will be there, and total 4 data centers will be used in GZRS. That's one of the reasons this is one of the most expensive one also. Now, obviously, which redundancy configuration you are going to choose for your storage, it all depends on what is the importance of the data, whether you are able to afford to lose the data or not. It's all based on that we decide what kind of durability and redundancy we want for that. Every time when you're going to create Azure Storage account, they allow you to store data in 4 different formats. You have Azure Blobs, which allows you to store data in a kind of a container where your data will be stored in binary large object. Most of the time we use this thing when we have huge amount of data which is unstructured. Then we have Azure Disk, which is providing us some kind of a disk which you can use and associate with your application, virtual machines and other services. This Azure Disk is going to be allowing you to store all the files kind of things inside that. We also have Azure Files, which is similar kind of thing, but it has a separate layer on top of it. Then we have Azure Queues, which is nothing but a message-based queuing mechanism where you can store the messages like first in, first out or last in, first out kind of a message queuing mechanism. This has a limitation of the size that each message which you are storing inside that should not exceed 64 KB. But yes, when you are trying to store the messages which are useful for communication, Azure Queue is one of the preferable options. And last one is Azure Files. As I said, most people get confused with Azure Disk and Azure Files. Disk is something like a hard drive, but I will say Azure Files is very similar to your OneDrive folder. It allows you to store your files inside that, which you can share it with someone using SMB protocol. This server message block protocol is the same protocol which is mostly used by the cloud drives nowadays. These 4 options are allowing you to store data in your Azure Storage services. There is one more option which is known as Azure Table Storage, but that's something which nowadays Microsoft also do not prefer because we have better alternative of that which is available, which is known as Azure Cosmos DB. So let's not talk about Azure Table. It's not important for this particular course, and now it's not important in the real life use cases also. When I look at the storage service public endpoints, as we know that we have a REST APIs connected with storage account, it allows you to access this storage services on this kind of a public endpoints. Very soon, when I'm going to show you a storage account, I'll create one storage account and I'll show you that this kind of URLs will be generated if you want to access any of the storage services. Basically, it is going to be a REST service which will be exposed on this particular URL. Every time when you're going to store data inside the Azure Storage, you have to configure the proper access tier. We also have a default settings for the access tier when we upload the data into storage. When you upload the data, and if you have a requirement that you are going to access the data very frequently, then we advise you to choose the hot access tier for that, because this is perfect for accessing the data very frequently. If you have a data which is not very frequently accessible, maybe you're going to access it and store it for a longer period of time, but you are going to access it very infrequently, then you can go for the cool tier. As it is mentioned here, we prefer that if it is infrequently accessed and it is stored for at least 30 days, then we should keep the data as cool. The access cost is going to be very less in hot, but the storage cost is going to be high. And same way, if you go to the cooler tiers like cool, cold and archive, the storage cost is going to be very less, but access cost is going to increase. Now same way, if I go to cold tier, which is optimized for storing data, which is again infrequent, but this time we are keeping a timer or a counter kind of a thing, which is 90 days. So it is like if it is accessed and stored for at least 90 days, then I should keep it on cold, which will again help me in controlling the cost of the storage. And last is archive. This is optimized for storing the data which is very rarely accessed, or mostly we really do not want to access it in months. That's the reason it is saying that at least for 180 days, if you have to store the data and you are not accessing it, we are very rarely accessing that, then that is the one which is a preferable requirement in archive. When you access the data from archive, it will not be available to you immediately. It will maybe come with a delay. But storing data in archive is cheapest, while accessing data in archive is the most expensive one. So you should plan it accordingly, that which access tier is the right choice for you. We also have something which is maybe out of the scope of this course, but that is something which is known as life cycle management of this access tier. So when you are configuring your data, the moment your data is getting old, you can configure to move the data from hot to cool to cold and archive tiers. That life cycle we can configure inside the Azure Storage account, which makes our life easy, and we do not need to move the data from one tier to another tier manually. We have an exercise which is allowing us to create a storage blob. Now remember, this is creating a storage account, but we are not focusing on file and queues and tables kind of thing. We are only focusing on the blob data because that's the most important one. Let me try to create a storage account and show you this kind of things immediately right now. Later on, you can go through the exercise and try to create this by yourself. Okay, I am on my Azure portal right now, and what I want to do is I want to create a new storage account quickly. So I'm searching for storage account. It's going to show me a page where I'll get the options for that in the marketplace. I'm selecting a storage account. I'm going to click on create. And now, as we discussed, we are going to follow all those configurational concepts which we have discussed. I'm choosing some resource group. Let's say I'm going to create a new resource group called AZ-900 I'm going to create a storage account. I'm specifying Maruti storage with some number at the end of this, just to make sure it's going to be a unique name, globally unique. Region, I can choose whichever I want. But remember one thing, if you're choosing a region like, let's say, East US, when you choose a region which is having multiple zones available in that, you can get the redundancy options which are all four: LRS, GRS, ZRS, and GZRS. All four are there. And you can choose whichever you want. But in spite of that, if I go for some other region, like let's say I'm going into South India. When I go for South India region, it is giving me only two options. The ZRS and GZRS options are not there because this is one of the regions which only have one data center, and then it cannot give you a zone specific redundancy in that. I can choose accordingly. As of now, I'm going with East US. Yep, here it is. And I'm going with the GRS option because I want to make sure that more than one regions are going to be involved in this redundancy. Once the redundancy is selected, I can click on next, which is having so many other options for security, networking, and data protection. I do not want to go into this configuration right now. We'll directly click on review, and if the validation pass, we will click on create, which will quickly create a storage account for us in no time. My storage account is under deployment. And yes, it is completed. Let's click on go to resource. It's showing me I have my storage account which is created in East US. But I want you to observe that the primary location for this is East US, while the secondary location for that is the West US. Why the two different regions are visible? Why the two different copies are available? Because we selected GRS kind of a redundancy option. When we have these options, focus on the left side where we have a data storage section. It shows you that you have containers, which allows you to store blob, file shares, queues, and tables. Let's click on containers. I want to create a new container. Let's say I'm giving a name of the container something like images. It's going to show me that this container right now is going to have an anonymous access level. Now, this access level is going to define who can access your data and who cannot. But right now, I'm keeping it private, so nobody can access my data without my permission. And I'm going to keep it like this. I'm going to click on create. When I create this, it is showing me that your container is created. Now inside this container, I can try to upload any particular data, which can be image, video, any document. But the moment I upload that, ultimately the document is going to be converted into Blob, because containers are going to allow you to store data in binary large objects. Let me click on upload. I'm going to drag and drop some files from my computer. So let me just take them. I have one image file. I'm uploading it here. I just drag and drop that JPEG file here, and I'm going to click on upload. Once I do this, the image file is uploaded. It is showing me that the type of this file is actually blob. In short, the data is converted into Blob. And then if you focus, the access tab for this is hot. It means this is right now going to count it as a hot, so I can frequently access this. Now if I want to manually change the access tab of this, I can tick mark the particular image, I can change the tier, and whatever tiers options which we have seen in the slide are similarly available here. You have hot, cool, cold, and archive. You can change the tier, and according to that, your storage cost and transaction cost is going to change. As of now, this is enough. Let's go back to our slides so that we can complete this module. Now, once you have storage account, and if you decide that I want to move my data into Azure Cloud, there are many tools which can help you in that. One of the tools is Azure Migrate. This is a unified migration platform, which is specially meant for moving your data from on-premise to cloud. This has a range of integrated and standalone tools which are helping you in assessment and migration both. This tool is helping you to migrate on-premise data into Azure Cloud. And this is something which you have to prefer when you have a data which is not like a database kind of a data. It is going to be stored in your on-premise disk and drives. Then Azure Migrate is a perfect tool for that. Other than that, we have Azure Data Box. Now, when you're using Azure Migrate, you maybe need an internet connection, and you have to shift the data using the internet connection into the cloud. While in spite of that, the other alternative is Azure Data Box. When you have a data which is huge in size, you can store up to 80 terabytes of data into one data box, and you can move this particular data to your disaster recovery backups to Azure. So maybe you have an on-premise servers where you have a disaster recovery backup servers. The huge amount of data which you have stored there, if you try to upload that, it's going to take a huge time. And that's the reason data box kind of services are available. It protects your data in a rugged case during a transit. So this is something like it is a physical box inside which your data is going to be there. And that physical data, like a hard drive box, is going to be transferred in transit from your on-premise server to Azure Cloud Infrastructure. You can migrate your data out of the Azure for compliance and regulatory needs when you need that. And you can migrate data to Azure from remote locations with limited or no connectivity kind of data also. So there are chances you have on-premise servers in which Azure is not having the connectivity, but you can use data box where you can transfer terabytes of data into a data box and move the data to the cloud. This is a basic difference between Azure Migrate and Data Box, because this is a physical data box which you can move and shift it to the Azure Cloud Infrastructure. Now we have file management options, which is the last part of this particular module, where we are focusing on three tools. All three names here, AZ Copy, Azure Storage Explorer, and Azure File Sync, are three different tools for file management option. Remember, we have file share where we can share the files, we can upload the files. Now, AZ Copy is a command line utility which allows you to copy data. It mostly copies the blob and the file kind of a data from your location to your storage account. It is mostly one directional synchronization which is enabled inside that. So it makes sure that the data will be transferred and synchronized. On the other hand, we have something which is Azure Storage Explorer, which is a UI based tool. You have a graphical user interface associated with that. Same like your file explorer of a Windows, you can use a storage explorer and you can check what kind of blob files are available in your storage account. This is compatible with almost Windows, Mac, and all versions of Linux associated with that. And it uses AZ copy to handle the file operation. So internally, Azure Storage Explorer is also using AZ copy only. The third one, which is Azure File Sync, which is specially meant for synchronizing Azure and on-premise files in a bi-directional manner, not a one-directional. Think about it. You have multiple on-premise servers and it has some important data and files inside that. You do not want to migrate or shift that permanently, but you want to make sure that the copy of that data files should be available on Azure and it should be synchronized. Whenever we change at either end, it should synchronize and it should make sure that the data will be updated. If that is your requirement, Azure File Sync is your product. Cloud tiering keeps frequently accessed files local while freeing up the space. So if you try to change certain things, if you try to delete the things, it's going to take care of that. It has a rapid provisioning of failed local servers. So when you have some on-premise disaster or some kind of a failover happening, Azure File Sync can make sure that you should not lose your data. These three tools are surely going to be your perfect choice when you want to copy data, manage data, or make sure that data is available at multiple places, including on-premise and cloud.